What happens when the very systems designed to protect us are dismantled in the name of progress? That question haunted me the moment I stepped out of the server room for the last time. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Shaw, retired Marine, Corps Cyber Division. For over a decade, I helped defend some of the most sensitive military and defense logistics networks in the country. But nothing, not battlefield deployments, not cyber intrusions from state-level actors, prepared me for what happened at AegisCore. You see, in war, you expect your enemy to come at you head-on. In corporate defense, they smile at you in morning briefings and undo everything you've built by lunchtime. They call it modernization. They call it efficiency. I called it what it was, a security time bomb, counting down. 3 days after I was removed from my position, the breach began. And the people who called me paranoid were suddenly calling me something else entirely. Essential. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about foresight, about what it means to do the right thing when no one's listening, and what happens when the quiet warnings of the experienced are ignored for the excitement of speed. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before the breach. Before the headlines. Before the silence turned into a scramble. I wasn't always in a server room. I started my career on the ground, literal boots on the ground, as a communications officer in the Marine Corps. Deployed twice. Saw what happened when field units lost comms for even 10 minutes. That experience made me obsessed with infrastructure, redundancy, reliability. When I transitioned into cyber operations, I brought that same mindset with me. Assume failure, plan for chaos, and always build for the moment everyone else thinks will never come. By the time I joined AegisCore, I had 15 years of secure operations under my belt, including time at CENTCOM's Network Resilience Task Force. AegisCore was a hybrid civilian-military defense contractor, mid-sized, scrappy, more ambition than budget. But what they had was potential. They'd won a handful of logistics contracts with the Department of Defense and were trying to scale rapidly without compromising security. That's where I came in. They didn't need another flashy startup CTO who'd chase buzzwords and break things. They needed someone who'd been under real pressure, someone who understood that in defense, failing fast isn't a strategy, it's a liability. So I came on board as Director of Cyber Infrastructure and quietly set about rebuilding their systems from the ground up. The architecture was a mess. Piecemeal tools duct-taped together by consultants who'd long since moved on. No segmentation between client environments. No real incident response framework. And barely any monitoring. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I didn't complain, I got to work. Over the next 4 years, I designed and deployed a fully custom zero-trust network architecture. No shortcuts, no off-the-shelf magic buttons. Just methodical, hard-earned design. Every component had redundancies. Data isolation was non-negotiable. Privilege escalation alerts were hard-coded into the backbone. If someone tried to move laterally through our system, I'd know before they did. But here's the thing about doing the job right. No one notices when nothing goes wrong. That's fine. I didn't need recognition. I believed in the mission. Our clients weren't selling makeup or streaming movies. They were coordinating logistics for defense supply chains. Human lives depended on those shipments arriving intact and on time. For me, cybersecurity wasn't about compliance, it was duty. I trained a small team, including a sharp junior analyst named Lena Voss, a former Air Force cyber cadet who'd jumped into the private sector early. Together we built a lean but effective unit. Lena handled detection and response drills, and I focused on long-term architectural resilience. We pushed for more resources, sure, but when those got denied, we made do. Built tools ourselves, rewrote frameworks, wrote our own documentation. When we had time, we always meant to circle back to make it more polished, more transferable, but there was always another patch, another deployment, another risk to mitigate. Documentation was always tomorrow's task. Today was for defending the perimeter. And we did. For 4 solid years, not a single breach. Not even a serious alert. That didn't turn out to be just noisy traffic. No one thanked us. They just assumed that's how it was supposed to work. That was the first warning sign, because in cybersecurity the absence of noise is rarely seen as success, it's seen as over-engineering. And eventually, someone comes along who thinks you've built too much. And that someone was coming. I just didn't know it yet. His name was Evan Mallory. He came in wearing confidence-like body armor, all buzzwords and bravado, fresh off a high-profile exit from a failing Silicon Valley tech firm that had pivoted into crypto before crashing. Now, apparently, he was our new chief operating officer, brought in to scale operations and bring agile thinking to defense logistics. I knew what that really meant. Cut costs, move fast, and treat cybersecurity like overhead. At his first town hall, he used phrases like digital transformation and platform velocity. But the one that really landed, at least for me, was when he called AegisCore a startup with training wheels. That told me everything I needed to know. In the military, we call that mission misalignment. It didn't take long before Evan and I collided. The first red flag was subtle. He emailed me directly, skipping chain of command, to ask why we were using so many proprietary controls and why we hadn't migrated to the industry-standard cloud-native stack his consultant group was promoting. I explained politely that our clients required bespoke data isolation, DoD-grade encryption, and granular audit logs that off-the-shelf tools didn't provide. I even included excerpts from contract compliance language. He didn't reply. A week later, Lena forwarded me a Slack message she wasn't supposed to see. Evan had been telling product managers that my team was too slow, that we bottleneck innovation, and that he'd be looking into rethinking cyber controls. This wasn't just a philosophical disagreement anymore. It was personal. Meetings turned tense. In one leadership call, he openly challenged me in front of the CTO and other department heads. "I understand the need for security, Adrian," he said, "but the point of defense is to protect movement, not prevent it. You're building sandbags on a runway." I remember staring at him for a moment before replying, "No, I'm building the runway. You're the one trying to take off in a storm without a flight plan." Laughter was thin. The CTO looked uncomfortable. No one backed me up, and just like that, the power dynamic shifted. Over the next month, things escalated. Our security review, windows were shortened. Code was pushed into production without proper pen testing. Lena's anomaly reports were quietly closed without follow-up. When I asked questions, I was told by legal to trust the new vision. They used phrases like operational pivot and modern governance. I knew what they meant. Less security, more speed. Then Evan hired a team of outside contractors, an automation firm that specialized in AI-driven infrastructure scaling. Their pitch was polished. They demoed slick dashboards and machine learning, response engines that frankly looked impressive if you didn't know better. But I did. They wanted to replace our alerting systems with predictive flagging, swap our physical segmentation for software-defined firewalls, and introduce continuous rule updates without requiring manual audits. When I pushed back, Evan accused me of being stuck in a Cold War mindset. "Innovation is about trust," he said. "We have to trust that these systems will learn as they grow." "No," I told him. "Defense is about verification. Trust is what you build after validation, not before." He shook his head. "You're not seeing the big picture." I was, and I saw it unraveling. The real problem wasn't Evan. It was that the board loved him. His slide decks were clean. His lingo sounded modern. He promised 20% operational efficiency gains within 2 quarters. I couldn't compete with that. Not with logic, not with caution. I tried to protect what I could. I locked down certain systems behind multi-layer access. I flagged key nodes as critical infrastructure in our internal documentation. I even started quietly creating isolated backups of configuration logs just in case. Lena grew more nervous by the day. She called it creeping corrosion. I called it inevitable. One afternoon, she came into my office pale. "They're changing firewall protocols without approval," she said. "The patch notes are vague, and I found 2 open ports on Node C that weren't there yesterday. Did you log it?" Of course, but the ticket's been closed twice without explanation. That night I didn't sleep. I logged in from home, checked traffic patterns. Something didn't feel right. The architecture was still intact, but I could sense tension in the system. Too many blind spots forming too fast. Tripwires I'd placed weren't triggering, which meant someone was disabling them. But the real blow came 3 days later. An internal memo circulated that the company was restructuring to create distributed security accountability across departments. My role? Being evaluated for strategic realignment. I wasn't fired yet, but I was being cornered, quietly and surgically. That's when I realized this wasn't just about policy differences. Evan wasn't trying to fix the system, he was trying to control it, and the fewer people who understood how it really worked, the more powerful he became. I wasn't being left behind. I was being erased. I was being erased. Not demoted. Not sidelined. Systematically written out of the architecture I had built from scratch, until all that remained of my presence was a name buried in old documentation. It started with my access. One Monday morning, my admin credentials failed during a routine audit check. No warning, no explanation. I assumed it was a glitch, maybe an internal sync issue. But when I contacted IT, they told me, with hesitation, that security privileges were being reassessed under new operational directives. The directive, of course, came from Evan's office. Lena messaged me 2 hours later. They just revoked my elevated access too. I can't even open the forensic console. They hadn't removed us all at once. That would have looked suspicious. Instead, they unraveled the system thread by thread, moving logs to generalized dashboards, consolidating privileged accounts under newly formed DevSecOps pods. They said it was for streamlining visibility, but what they really meant was stripping context and diluting control. Worse, they began disabling systems they didn't understand. The custom subnet monitoring tool I'd designed, capable of catching lateral movement between network zones before it escalated, was deactivated without consultation. When I asked why, I was told it was redundant under the new automated monitoring suite. But redundancy was the whole point. That week, I stayed late every night, quietly backing up every architectural diagram, custom script, and forensic report I could salvage. Not company data, just my frameworks, my methods. The blueprint for a system no one else truly understood. I encrypted the archive and stored it on a secure private drive. I didn't know what would happen next, but I wasn't going to walk out blind. And then, late one Thursday, I noticed it. A series of authentication pings coming from an internal testing environment I had deprecated months ago. Harmless on the surface. An engineer poking around, maybe. But the access patterns were off. Unusual credentials, odd timestamps. When I traced it back, the IP range didn't belong to our Active Directory. In fact, it didn't belong to any documented segment. Flagged it in the internal security queue. Within minutes, the ticket was closed with a one-line comment. Reviewed by ops, no issue. Lena saw it too. That's not a false positive, she said quietly. That's either someone testing an exploit, or already inside. We both knew it. But there was nothing left we could do officially. Our privileges had been eroded. The tripwires I'd built were either disabled or ignored. And worse, Evan had effectively rewritten the internal protocol to filter out anything that wasn't flagged by his new AI-led detection engine. Anything too custom, too specific, too mine, was dismissed as noise. Maybe they're just overconfident, Lena suggested, trying to be generous. They're not overconfident, I said. They're blind, and they've started burning the safety net. I began to prepare for the inevitable. I printed out key flow diagrams, wrote out a hand-labeled map of network dependencies, highlighted where segmentation overlaps occurred. Then, on a personal note, I drafted a list of what could go wrong, ranked not by likelihood but by how fast the damage would spread if left unchecked. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I still believed I could get through to someone. Maybe the CTO, maybe legal, maybe even Evan if I could just frame it as a risk-to-business argument. But the next day, I received an automated calendar invite. Subject line: Strategic Security Realignment. Discussion attendees: Evan Mallory, HR Director, myself. Location: Conference Room. Echo 2I sat at my desk and stared at the screen for a full minute, reading it over and over. There was no ambiguity anymore. They weren't just removing me from the system, they were removing me from the company. I turned off my monitor, stood up, and took one last slow walk past the glass-walled operations floor where analysts stared at screens filled with meaningless dashboards, algorithms and alerts dancing in carefully optimized patterns that no longer reflected reality. They thought they'd made the system smarter. What they'd actually done was cut out the one thing, keeping it truly safe: context. And the cost of that was coming, fast. The cost of that was coming, fast. But first, they had to complete the ritual. Conference room Echo 2 was cold, not physically, climate-controlled like everything else at AegisCore, but emotionally sterile, designed to make terminations feel procedural, clinical, forgettable. A HR-sanitized environment for ending the chapters that don't fit the new storyline. Evan was already seated when I walked in. So was Mia Cartwright from Human Resources. She gave me a soft smile, the kind that tried to be sympathetic but landed somewhere between pity and obligation. Evan didn't smile at all. "Adrian, thanks for joining us," he said, gesturing toward the chair across the table. I sat down but didn't bother removing my coat. "I'll get straight to the point," Evan began. "As part of our broader, operational transition, we're restructuring the cybersecurity framework. We're moving toward a federated security model, embedding responsibility within product teams rather than maintaining a centralized command structure. In plain English, we're cutting your position," he continued, voice even, rehearsed. "This isn't about performance, it's about alignment with our future strategy. The board fully supports this direction." Of course they did. The board never sees the breach until it hits the headlines. Mia slid a folder across the table. "This outlines your separation package. 3 months' salary, healthcare coverage through the quarter, a non-disparagement clause, and accelerated vesting of your remaining shares." I opened the folder. The numbers were fair, generous even. Evan had covered his bases. No room for outrage. Just a signature and a quiet exit. "We'll need your access credentials before end of day," he said. "James from DevOps will handle handover if needed." I looked at him and said evenly, "James doesn't know the difference between our passive packet monitor and the actual behavioral flagging system." Evan's face didn't change. "Everything's documented." "Documented, yes. Understood?" "No." His eyes flicked to Mia. She shifted in her seat but said nothing. For a moment, the silence stretched. I reached into my bag and pulled out a notepad. On it, I'd handwritten credentials, carefully selected: domain access, VPN tunnel, backup, override security console, and a separate line with the monitoring override key. 8 entries. 9 years of work distilled into 8 strings of letters and numbers. I slid the pad across the table. Evan glanced at it and nodded, like a manager ticking a box. "Change is hard," he said flatly, "but this is the right direction for AegisCore. We appreciate your service." I stood, pocketed the folder, and said only, "Good luck." No handshakes, no final words of thanks. Just the quiet sound of a badge reader clicking as I left the building for the last time. The lobby was quiet, too quiet for a Friday afternoon. I passed the digital wall display showcasing client logos, press blurbs, and a banner headline from last year. AegisCore achieves highest cyber readiness rating in sector. I had written the framework that led to that rating. I had rewritten the core infrastructure segment by segment when no one else would. I had bled into that system. Long nights, missed holidays, field calls at 3 a.m. Now it belonged to a boardroom fantasy of speed over substance. I didn't feel angry, not exactly, just cold and certain. They didn't know what they were dismantling. They couldn't see it, not in a dashboard, not in a budget sheet. But the moment would come. The moment when alerts started firing and no one knew what they meant. When the clean automated systems would give them the wrong answer with absolute confidence. And when that happened, I wouldn't be there. But the systems I'd left behind, they'd still be watching. I didn't expect the breach to happen so soon. Just 49 hours after I handed in my badge, my phone lit up with a string of missed calls. The first was from Lena, then James, then an unknown number with a DC area code. The timestamps were within minutes of each other. Something had gone very wrong. I ignored the first wave. I had no intention of getting pulled back in. Let them figure it out. Let the new system prove its worth. But when Lena's name popped up again with a single-word text, emergency, I paused. I knew her well enough to know she didn't use that word lightly. I dialed. Adrian? Her voice was tight, breathless. Something's happening. It started late last night. We thought it was noise at first, but the anomaly count's spiking and no one knows what they're looking at. I didn't answer. She continued. Multiple client zones are reporting access inconsistencies. The AI monitors flagging traffic from unregistered subnets, but the alert thresholds were adjusted last week. Adjusted by who? Mallory's team. They consolidated detection rules and disabled secondary verification. Adrian, I think someone's in the system. I could feel my stomach tighten. Did the fallback tripwires activate? No, they're dark. All of them. James says the baseline hash checks were also deactivated in the last config push. Of course they were. Mallory's consultants had called those legacy friction points. Where's Mallory? In meetings. He hasn't acknowledged anything, publicly yet. The board's panicking. Legal's involved. Then you need to tell James to check the core segmentation logs manually. There was a pause on the line. He doesn't have access. I closed my eyes. Tell me you're kidding. They transferred core control to a new instance last week. Didn't migrate over the full access tree. I think they assumed the new tools could handle it all. They had cut me out so thoroughly, they'd forgotten to preserve the very keys. They'd need in a crisis. I could almost hear the system unraveling in real time. You need to isolate the north subnet immediately, I said. Pull the plug. Hard cutoff. Otherwise, they'll pivot into client-side command interfaces. I don't have the authority to do that, she whispered. Then find someone who does now. I hung up. 5 minutes later, Mallory called. Adrian, he said, skipping pleasantries. We're dealing with a minor situation. There's been some irregular traffic. It's not minor, I said flatly. You've got an active incursion. We have it contained. No, you don't. A beat of silence, then more quietly. We could use your insight, just a phone consult, nothing formal. I let the pause stretch before replying. You want me to consult on the system you just tore apart? No one said it wasn't valuable. We're simply redefining responsibility. I remember. He cleared his throat. We're prepared to compensate for your time. My contractor rate is $1,000 an hour, 4-hour minimum, paid in advance. Fine. He snapped. Send over the paperwork. How soon can you be available? I can't. Another pause. Why not? Because I've joined Iron Sentinel, and according to my severance, I can't touch your systems if I'm employed by a direct vendor. That was a lie. I hadn't officially joined anyone yet. But he didn't know that. Adrian, this is serious. Yes, it is. I hung up. For a moment, I considered going back in, just for Lena, for the team. But I knew how this would play out. They'd lean on me to stop the bleeding, then erase me again the moment the dust settled. Instead, I sent Lena a secure message. Check the quarantine trigger. If it hasn't fired, check scheduled task ID 7752. If it's been disabled, someone bypassed it intentionally. She didn't reply. But 15 minutes later, she sent back a screenshot. The task had been disabled 3 days ago. The same day, I left. It was all coming undone. By evening, the breach had gone public. Security forums were buzzing. An unnamed government contractor had experienced a catastrophic lapse affecting sensitive military procurement data. The headlines didn't say AegisCore, not yet. But in our world, everyone knew. At 11:42 p.m., a voicemail arrived from Stephen Chang, one of AegisCore's board members. His voice was controlled but strained. "Adrian, if you're willing to reconsider, the board would like to bring you back in an advisory capacity. Name your terms." I didn't respond. I was already in talks with Iron Sentinel, because some things once broken don't get fixed with an apology, and some fires have to burn through completely before anyone learns why the firewall existed in the first place. Because some fires have to burn through completely before anyone learns why the firewall existed in the first place. 2 days after the breach went public, I met with Iron Sentinel's executive team in a quiet conference room overlooking Puget Sound. No theatrics, no onboarding culture decks. Just a hard-nosed conversation about what needed to be built, and who they needed to build it. They'd been watching the AegisCore incident unfold in real time. Of course they had. In our world, security circles are smaller than people think, and word spreads faster than any exploit. They knew what I'd done, what I'd tried to prevent, and most importantly what I'd quietly built that held for years before the whole system was dismantled. The offer was clear: Director of Critical Infrastructure Strategy. A full team reporting to me. Freedom to architect without interference. Double my old salary. Equity. Full authority over client onboarding and internal threat architecture. And a special request: they wanted Lena too. By that afternoon she joined. I didn't say yes out of revenge. I said yes because the work mattered again. Because here, they understood that silence in the alert logs wasn't just a metric, it was a responsibility. The kind you didn't outsource to a dashboard. While AegisCore scrambled, Iron Sentinel moved. We absorbed 4 of AegisCore's former clients in less than a month. 2 of them were military logistics partners who asked, point blank, if I had been involved in their previous systems. I told them yes. They didn't ask for more. That was all they needed to hear. Behind the scenes, AegisCore flailed. Mallory disappeared from public view, and internal sources whispered of congressional oversight inquiries. The damage wasn't just reputational, it was structural. They'd lost operational control, and now they were racing to rebuild without anyone who understood the skeleton. One morning, Iron Sentinel's COO walked into my office and dropped a file on my desk. AegisCore just issued a request for external remediation proposals, he said. They're asking for your name specifically. I scanned the document, amused. They're trying to bring me back. Technically, they're asking us to send a team, but it's clear who they want. I looked at Lena, who had just finished briefing 2 new hires. You want to take this one? I asked her. She smiled. Let the juniors handle it. They need the reps. And that was the end of it. I never returned to AegisCore, never set foot in their crumbling infrastructure. I didn't need to. I had already won, not in spite of the firing, but because of it. The breach had become a case study. The slide decks that once ignored me were now dissecting the very architectural principles I'd built. News outlets quoted unnamed insiders describing how a zero-trust framework had been discarded to save development time, and how that decision had cost millions in incident response. In an ironic twist, Iron Sentinel was now being paid 3 times my former salary to rebuild what I'd already proven worked. I wasn't bitter. I was busy. We were scaling, taking on complex clients in healthcare, aerospace, and defense. Each time I sat down with a new team, I'd start with the same line. Security isn't about being clever. It's about being ready. Lena printed it on a poster and pinned it above the team whiteboard. Weeks turned into months. Quietly, more former AegisCore engineers reached out, looking for work, looking for purpose. We brought in who we could, gave them room to rebuild, to learn from the mistakes that had almost cost them everything. AegisCore was eventually acquired, not for its systems, not for its people, just for its client list. The brand name was retired, and the lessons, those stayed with us, where they belonged. In cybersecurity, the cost is always paid, either upfront in time, effort, and patience, or later in chaos, recovery, and regret. AegisCore chose the latter, and like so many before them, They learned the hard way that progress, without understanding, isn't innovation. It's negligence in disguise. What happened there wasn't just a failure of policy or process. It was a failure to value experience, to respect the quiet voices that protect the system, even when they're inconvenient. But this story isn't just about a company that fell. It's about the people who stayed true to the mission, the builders, the defenders, the ones who know that real security doesn't announce itself, it just quietly holds the line. If you've ever worked in a place where you were dismissed for being too careful, I'd be curious. How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and if stories like this resonate with you, if they make you think twice about what's happening behind the screens you trust every day, consider subscribing. Not because it helps me, but because it helps keep these stories alive. After all, sometimes the most important warning sign are the ones no one wants to hear.